We are live from Boston, covering the Shanghai Masters. Waiting for some folks to come on. Certainly there has to be some Djokovic fans out there. Well, your man was playing spot on today, folks. I'm just sort of having my coffee here in Boston, but we're going to wait for some folks to come on. There's a lot to say about this match between Coric and Djokovic. Djokovic, of course, lifts the trophy in Shanghai for the fourth time. We are, again, going to wait for some folks to come on. I think this is a strange time. In fact, we might try to go live later when there's a little more traffic, but the match has been over for a while. It took place at such an early hour in Boston that I actually couldn't wake up to watch it. It was about, 3 a.m. or 4 a.m. I just couldn't do that. Sorry, folks. Next time I will try to go and sort of burn the midnight oil. In the Australian Open, that happens too. The matches take place at a really early hour. But greetings for you folks coming on. Novak Djokovic is the emperor of Shanghai, so to speak. This was, in fact, a very competitive match at points. I thought Borna did a fairly good job today. I was quite amazed, in fact, at how he kind of kept on ticking, kept on charging, and was, even though he was sort of in the rearview mirror for most of the match, and the match did have the kind of air of inevitability at a point. Hi, John. How you doing? Nice to see you. I am interested in your views on this. This could be kind of a slow time on YouTube, to be honest, but this was the best time for me to come on today. Again, the match took place at a little too early of an hour for me this morning, so I got up and, of course, I watched the replay, and I watched every bit of it, and I want to talk about it. I want to give you a nugget. Of course, there are some rankings implications. I know for you Fed fans out there, I hope there's some Fed fans out there. I know you're probably living in kind of a grieving state at this point still, and I understand that. But as one of the commentators said, of course, we love the game of tennis. We love the greatest players, the best players on the court. Of course, as Federer clearly stated after the match yesterday, Borna Coric was the superior player on the court and was, in fact, something of a marvel to behold in many respects. Well, Coric continued, I think, the good form today. There's no reason that we should, be skeptical about Coric's future. This was a great run for him. He's still having the greatest season of his career. I was doing a little bit of reading about Borna Coric, and he had a real quick start to his career and recorded some really impressive wins. Good morning, Francesco. Yes, John, Coric did not quite have the answers for Djokovic today. The Djokovic serve was, I think, spot on today. Just relentless. We can look at some of those serving numbers to prove out that proposition. On the serving numbers for the match, Djokovic was 91% win percentage behind his first serve, that was for the entire match, folks. He was virtually unbeatable, unstoppable behind his first serves. There was some commentary on Djokovic's serves and the evolution of his serve and service motion and the shape of his serve, but it is a very effective weapon that can function in a way kind of under the radar because it doesn't have this aura of being this huge, big, conspicuous serve. It kind of it gets you in a different way. It gets the opponent in a different way. It's a little bit insidious, maybe would be one word to describe it. But he was 91% in terms of wins behind his first serve for this match. 70% wins behind his second serve, and that tells you this, the second serve win percentage is always a measure to some degree of the player's ground game, the extent to which the player can kind of back up a second serve, and that usually has to do with the ground game, or there can be other factors that contribute to that percentage. But again, 70% behind a second serve for Djokovic is fantastic, mind-blowingly good. Coric recorded some very good serving numbers as well. Listen, this match got off to a fairly even-keeled start. Good morning, culture and sport, or at least it's morning here. I'm still having my coffee. It was a wonderful match, I thought, today. It did have the air of inevitability in a way at a certain point, but we can kind of go through a little bit of what happened. I'm interested in your views. Of course, Novak Djokovic is the new world number 2, and he is eyeing and the world, by all appearances, given the form that Djokovic is exhibiting, given the level of commitment that he's sort of displaying here. We're getting a signal. I'm sorry. I hope this is coming through. I'm just going to kind of go through here. In any case, a lot of this came down to a couple, well, some of this came down to a couple of games. The reason I am skeptical or appearing a little uneasy is because I'm getting a sort of reconnect notice. I don't know whether it's because a lot of people are coming on or what, but we're talking about Djokovic versus Coric, and we're going through, we're back. If there was a bit of a freeze on the signal, but again, we're talking about Djokovic versus Coric in Shanghai, a very competitive match at points. I think most people will agree. Please do go on and watch the match. Whether there'll be great highlights from this match, I'm not sure. There are some interesting highlights, to be honest, but there was an air of inevitability. The key to the first set, there was some real strong playing coming from both sides of the court. I think I'm back on now, Cultura, but let me know. I think I went off and now I'm back on. There's a little bit of a delay in terms of when I'm getting your messages. But the first set, I do think, came down to the sixth game. It was on the Coric serve. It was a long game. It was a grueling game. And Djokovic came out the victor and was able to go up 4-2 with, again, in a way, Coric was doing exactly Coric was doing what he was doing to Federer yesterday, to Djokovic, right? He was landing a lot of great first serves. He was backing them up with power, precision, and penetration. But Djokovic, unlike Federer, and that must be said, Djokovic, unlike Federer, was able to neutralize these serves, was able to assume some kind of control over these points behind these very powerful Coric first serves, which again, Coric was landing. Coric was not playing badly today, folks. Look at his numbers. There were quite a few unforced errors. I think that that would be the one statistic that would kind of distinguish Coric, certainly from Novak Djokovic today. Coric, I think, made something on the order. He did make 38 unforced errors over the course of the match to Djokovic's 17 unforced errors. So Djokovic was a lot more consistent. The first set did come down to that sixth game. It was a brutal, long game, and Djokovic came out the victor. Well, that sort of shook Coric a bit, Novak Djokovic had exactly one break point, however, during the course of the first set, and he held a 100% conversion because he broke with his first break point. Well, that also tells you something about Coric. Towards the end of that set, he was holding at love. Coric was the Energizer Bunny in a way in this match. He just kept on ticking. And it did seem, particularly after the first game of the second set, however, that, of course, Coric was in the rearview mirror. In the first game of the second set, Djokovic was able to break and go up a break and a set, and you can't be in a better position going into the second set, going into the body of the second set anyway. But the break was kind of gifted to Djokovic. The break came from a number of fairly uncharacteristic, unforced errors from Coric. So that was disappointing in a way. It was sort of handed to Djokovic. Now, I don't want to take anything away from Djokovic because certainly he was still firing. He started to play a different kind of game, I think. All players play a different kind of game when you're up a set and a break. And he started to take some more chances. There were a couple more errors coming from Djokovic, but Coric was still attacking. Coric was still trying to out Djokovic in a way. But there were some really interesting points in the second set where, again, you get evidence of just how much of a fighter Coric is. In the ninth game, Coric went down on his own serve, love 40, but then fought back valiantly. And this was against a Djokovic that was not letting up. Djokovic was refusing to be bossed around. I think that's probably the nugget on this match, folks. Whereas Federer was sort of letting himself get bossed around by Coric, Djokovic refused to be bossed around. Everything was coming back with some interest, usually. So, in a way, it was a taste of the medicine that Coric was spooning out to Federer, but now it was coming from Djokovic to Coric, and Coric didn't have answers. Everything was coming back. It had interest. Toward the end, I will say, Djokovic let up a little bit, and Coric was able, in fact, to acquire a break point on the Djokovic serve during the course of the second set, but could not convert it. A lot of credit to Djokovic for the consistency today. He fell off a little bit at the end in terms of the unforced errors, but in a way that's explainable with reference to basically the different way in which he was approaching the match after breaking in the second set and taking the first set. So, again, Djokovic won in all of the point categories in the rallies except for the points over 9 points, where Coric actually won 13 of those and Djokovic won 10, so Coric won more of those really long rallies. Again, this gives you an indicator of just how perseverant how much perseverance Coric had in this match. He was ready and willing to go and fight to the last. It's just that Djokovic was too strong, too consistent. There were some beautiful points. I think that there will be some great highlights from this match, to be honest, folks. But for the most part, I would say it's not a great highlight match. It had sort of the air of inevitability. Djokovic, just was able to secure his breaks, and in both of these sets, they were predicated on a single break. It was another clinical type performance from Dr. Djokovic, from the surgeon, and all I can say is, wow. It's a little mysterious how Djokovic kind of works his magic on the court. It's not conspicuous. He doesn't have a flashy game, but wow, he is a player that I felt myself kind of depending on. I love it when I can depend on players, when I can start kind of getting behind them a little bit and I can depend on them, that they're going to land their shots. And with Djokovic, I could depend on him today in a way that, Obviously, I could not depend on Roger Federer. Yesterday, Djokovic created 9 break points on the Coric serve, but again, converted only 2 of them. Not a great conversion rate, but the genius of Djokovic is not in the conversion rate. It's in the sheer number of break point opportunities that he is able to create. So one of the things that it can be sort of the recipe for a match that is not as highly entertaining and as highly dramatic as other matches are when breaks occur in the first game of a set. Well, yesterday, as I recall, the breaks came, I believe, in the first game of both of the sets. Federer got off to terrible starts in both of those sets and then, of course, could not recover and lost both. It was a straight set loss. Well, it is a circumstance when the break occurs so early that it can produce a kind of dull match that, again, has the air of inevitability to it. There was a little bit of that today with Djokovic versus Coric, but there were also some great dramatic points. There was some fantastic net play from Novak Djokovic. I really enjoyed watching the cheetah move around the court, and I am enjoying watching Novak Djokovic, execute a sort of second coming. And that is maybe what we can talk about just in conclusion. With respect to the rankings points, listen, folks, it looks very likely that Novak Djokovic will reassume the world #1 position, will usurp Rafael Nadal. The calculus, in essence, works out like this. If Nadal is playing well and reaches the final, he will have to win the final if Djokovic is also... If it's Nadal versus Djokovic in the Paris final, then Nadal will have to win that final, obviously, to hang on to the #1 position. But anything short of a win, and if Djokovic continues to charge forward, anything short of a Paris win for Nadal is basically putting him at extreme risk, because it is looking like Djokovic will probably lift the Paris trophy. So Federer, of course, has dropped into the #3 position, but there are a number of different permutations in terms of how this could work out. Assuming, again, that nothing untoward happens, and assuming that it's Nadal versus Djokovic in the Paris final, then Nadal will have to win that match in order to hang on to the #1 position. But if Nadal's only in the semifinals, or Nadal crashes out like he did last year in the quarterfinals, I think that he is going to be at risk. I think he's all but toppled at this point if Djokovic can continue this form, this commitment, this consistency, this precision. Yes, I like Spartacus too. Thank you for that. We have fun coming up with some of the best kind of descriptive names for Novak Djokovic. He's an elusive player in some ways, but in other ways, everything makes sense with him. It's not a picture of beauty out there with Novak Djokovic. In a way, he does represent something of an opposite, something of a polar opposite from Roger Federer in terms of the way he approaches the game. He might be a little more aesthetically pleasing, in fact, than Nadal on the court, and we could talk about that. But beauty doesn't by itself win tennis matches, folks, and there's something to be said for a more scientific approach. By elusive, I mean with an E. Cultura, I mean hard to comprehensively understand in terms of his approach. At least for me, I'm trying to understand the Djokovic sort of magic, and I have come to believe that there is some layers that you need to peel back and to understand just how he works his magic. But he does work it, and there is no question in the tennis world right now that Novak Djokovic is executing something like a second coming, and that may very well be, it looks very likely, in fact, that he is going to be the world #1 if he wins in Paris, if he wins the Tour finals at the end of the year in London. Well, He's going to be the favorite coming into Melbourne and coming into 2018. So we'll just have to see what he can do. I mean, given the history of this, it looks like he might very well have a very long run. It probably won't last forever in terms of this level of dominance, but we're going to have to see what Rafael Nadal definitely can't last forever in terms of this level of dominance. But from the history, from the precedent, it looks like he could definitely have a run that lasts, I don't know, a year or two. He could definitely take up another take up all 4 slam titles at once again for the second time. That could happen based on the evidence, based on the history. Federer, we're going to have to do a complete post-mortem on. We can talk about Federer a bit now. I do want to give some attention to Djokovic, but of course Federer, now the world number 3, but unclear where he's destined to be in terms of the rankings. He does seem to be falling off the mark a little bit. He had a resurrection for sure against Kei Nishikori, and that was a sight to behold. And for all of the Federer fans in the world, I think they were very appreciative of that performance, being able, privileged in a way, to be able to watch Federer exhibit that kind of form again in the match against Kei Nishikori. But in the main, in terms of how Federer is performing in the more clutch situations, when the real pressure is turned on, when the opponent is sort of turning the screws in a very precise and consistent way, like Coric was, Federer seems to be buckling. And based on how Djokovic took care of Coric today, I don't think Federer would have had a chance against Djokovic, because Coric, once again, was playing just fine today. He was, in fact, executing some really great shots. There was some great shot selection, and he was just fighting right to the last, and that's one thing that really impressed me about Coric. Again, it all came down to that 6th game in the first set, of course, and then the first game of the second set, which really gave the match the air of inevitability. But as evidence, like I said before, that Coric was just fighting right to the last, absolutely committed to possibly coming back, even though he was in the rearview mirror from the outset in the second set, was during that 9th game in the second set. He went down love 40 and then fought valiantly back to win that game. Unfortunately, he was already down a break. So, listen, congratulations to Djokovic. I think it was his 11th title on Asian soil, the record 4th title in Shanghai. He is now with 2 Masters 1000 titles under his belt for this year. He's got 2 Grand Slams under his belt. In a way, he's beginning to look like the number 1 player, irrespective of what the formal criteria suggest or the formal criteria produce in terms of a ranking position. It looks like he's the de facto number 1 player in the world right now. The serve has come together for Djokovic in some miraculous ways. It's in fact a newly constructed motion, a newly constructed serve in some ways, but it's even better than his previous one, to be honest. He is entering into another sort of heyday, I think, and it could be pretty scary to watch him work over the next few months. Well, Federer, in his post-match interview yesterday, did indicate that he's not going anywhere, so it's possible that Federer will be giving Djokovic something of a run for Djokovic's money if something gives with Djokovic, and if Federer can kind of step up his game a little bit too, because I do think at this level of intensity with Djokovic, where he's just shutting out the competition, I mean, to be honest, it wasn't the most difficult draw for Djokovic in Shanghai. it was a little more difficult for Federer, and I was impressed, notwithstanding the fact that Federer dropped a set. I was impressed very much with his wins over Medvedev and Bautista Agut, and then, of course, came the Nishikori match. Well, Djokovic had kind of an easier run, but then you saw some evidence that, you know, Djokovic was not going to be taking any malarkey in Shanghai when he just shut Alex Zverev. Well, coming into this final, of course, Djokovic was the favorite, but Coric showed a lot of promise yesterday, and I think that given the evidence of the match with Federer, I think the expectation was that this was going to be a fine and competitive match between Coric and Djokovic. It turned out to be a pretty competitive match. There were some very dramatic points, and there was some great tennis, flashes of brilliance from both sides, some classic Djokovic in terms of the backhands down the line and in terms of just exhibiting a sort of ease, an effortlessness on the court in kind of moving Coric around. Again, the total opposite from the dynamic that was happening between Coric and Federer. Coric was just bossing Federer around, and Djokovic was not, just refusing to be bossed. That's what happened. I mean, he will not be bossed. He is sort of refractory in that way, kind of recalcitrant. He will not yield to the authority of Borna Coric. No, he was getting everything back with interest, and he refused to be dominated. He continued to just exert enough dictation to sort of neutralize Federer. But I do, and that's the right way to put it, Djokovic is the neutralizer. Djokovic was neutralizing Coric. I'm sorry, did I say Federer? He was neutralizing Coric in a way that Federer was simply incapable of doing yesterday. Well, as I said before, there's going to be some good highlights from this match, but it wasn't the perfect recipe for a lot of great highlights, to be honest. There was some great stuff, but it did have the air of inevitability. It did have the air of sort of a workmanlike affair, because Djokovic gets into that mode, particularly lately. Now, in the Rogers Cup, he was playing a different style of tennis because he was dropping sets. He was dropping sets, and he was having to kind of muster up second wins at a point that it seems like Djokovic actually has to lose sets in order to win matches to kind of get him revved up. But the dynamic has changed now, and Djokovic is winning in a much more clean way in terms of his matches for the last couple of months or whatever since the U.S. Open. Certainly, they're much cleaner wins. And the reason is that it's just the level of play is just, it's in the stratosphere with him, folks. There's so much to talk about in this match, and I'm not going to be able to cover it all, but I do think that given the fact that he's coming through in straight sets, and in fact, the Rogers Cup matches with Djokovic were a little more entertaining. He was smashing rackets. They were more dramatic. They were more emotional. This is very workmanlike. He's very clinical, and he is very surgeon-like in a way. And it's just a very workmanlike affair with Novak Djokovic. So, yes, Cultura, you should write a book. And I'm sorry, there was a comment before. Who were we talking about being emotional about? Was somebody saying that I was emotional about tennis? Well, if that's what you're saying, I want to talk about that. It's probably some reality to it, although I try to keep the emotions out to some extent. But I have a soft spot for Roger Federer. I'll admit that, and I can't kind of run away from that fact on the one hand, but try to bring a fairly unemotional analysis. Listen, Novak Djokovic does not create good opportunities for emotional or sort of high-pitched commentary in a way. It's very workmanlike, and it calls out for a workmanlike analysis. Well, he will be most likely the world #1. Drop a comment about this match. I want to hear about it. I'll be checking the comments later. I thought it was, again, a very formidable display. You were talking about the other guy. You were saying, actually, Matt's too emotional? Really? Matt's, yeah, maybe he's been emotional lately. I haven't been over to visit him in a while. Maybe Matt's been a little emotional. Well, it's hard not to be emotional when Federer is losing, and I know that Matt is a huge Federer fan. So, my heart goes out to Matt in a way. It does get a little emotional sometimes watching Roger fall. And as I was talking about yesterday, I think in a way we owe an enormous thank you to Roger, because it looks as if he is not only going to show us his brilliant career in terms of the peaks, but I think that he's also going to show us his fall in all its detail, in all of its in all of the truth that it brings forth. I mean, listen, he's an older guy, and maybe I should say mortality. I mean, it's going to show us his mortality. All champions must fall. Champions rise and fall, but he's going to show us. He has the courage to show us his fall, and for that we should be very happy. And for Roger, it does require some courage, because he's going to have to come out onto the court. And thanks, Ollie. I appreciate it. Thank you so much. All right. Sorry about the lag. Let's see if it goes this time. We're having some small problems. It's kind of doing a reconnect, but I think we might be back on. So we are reflecting on Novak Djokovic versus Borna Coric, the final at the 2018 Shanghai Masters. Novak Djokovic has lifted his second Masters trophy this season, and also has 2 Grand Slams under his belt. Well, it seems very likely that Novak Djokovic will be the #1 player in the world at the end of the year. He's won it 4 times. He's won the Shanghai Masters 4 times. That is correct. Unhinged Obesity. By the way, I like your little handle there for the sheer bizarreness of it. But Nadal's been out for a while, folks. There is one configuration in terms of circumstances that could produce a situation where Nadal hangs on to the #1 position. And I think there's some strange permutation of circumstances where, in fact, Roger Federer might be able to reclaim the #1 position. Well, I think it's almost mathematically impossible. But I don't think it's quite mathematically impossible. I think he could possibly do it, but that's probably not going to happen. Djokovic, by all appearances, folks, is on course to reassume the world #1 position. And he, at this point, is very deserving of that title. I've had folks come on and comment on this channel over the course of the last year who have always believed that Novak would be back where he belongs, in terms of what the Novak Djokovic fans believe, back where he belongs at the #1 position. Culture and sport. One friend of mine sees, you're mentioning the points. I didn't quite get that message before it disappeared, but yes, Nadal still has a chance. And the only I think factor that leads me to believe that Nadal probably will not defend that position is that, again, he's coming back from that minor injury. He's not going to be fully warmed up, and to expect him to come back and win in Paris, which is what he'll have to do if Novak can continue to have this run of form, which, again, based on the precedent, folks, it looks like Novak Djokovic could very well dominate the tennis world for the next, say, 12 months, maybe even 18 months. It could be 2 years. Well, if he's dominating for 2 years, if he can find the form, if he can find the fight and the energy to maintain this form for a couple of years and to pick up, say, 6 more Grand Slams, well, it's not outside of the realm of possibility, folks, that Novak Djokovic will catch Roger Federer before Rafael Nadal, and maybe Rafael Nadal will not catch Roger Federer at all. It might just be that Djokovic leapfrogs ahead of Rafa and becomes the player who holds the most Grand Slams in history if he can get to 21. Listen, for those of us who have been watching Novak play, for those of us who have followed his career, I mean, he already has a number of records in this sport that have eluded Federer. He's got the record not only of holding all 4 of the major titles at once, but doing it on all 3 surfaces, which no one else in the history of tennis has done. So Novak will be playing the clay season. He will be a contender for the French Open in a way, arguably, that Roger Federer, based on recent form, is not. And I think that's pretty much the way to put it. I don't think Roger Federer is my pick to do very well at Roland Garros if he would play. Federer is going to be a contender. Federer is going to lift more trophies. He might have to get down and play a few more 250 and 500 level tournaments. But at this point in his career, maybe he's not willing to do that. That raises the question of whether he'll be able to catch Connors on the titles record. And it is a big question. I think that it really is his main goal. I think Federer just wants the titles record. But the problem is you have this problem where people will argue and accuse Federer of saying of not, not confronting the stiffest competition out there if he wins the rest of his titles, say at the 250 level or at the 500 level. If he's not playing in tournaments where Djokovic and Nadal are playing, well, then he's going to expose himself to an argument that those title wins aren't as meaningful as, a Masters 1000 title, which has eluded Federer. Federer cannot, it's been a what? It's been since last year in Shanghai. It's been exactly 1 year since Federer won a Masters 1000 title. Well, there's a question for you. Will Roger Federer ever win another Masters 1000 title with Novak Djokovic in the game? Listen, folks, one last comment on Federer, and we've said so much about Djokovic. He is a master. He is the emperor of Shanghai and a masterful tennis player who is pretty much flawless. And his game did change today once he was up a set and a break. Every play game changes a little bit after that. He did fall off a bit. There were some very disappointing points from Novak. There were a lot of points based on errors in this match. It was kind of a war of attrition in so many ways. That doesn't make for great highlights, but a win is a win, and that's the way that Novak Djokovic works his magic. But with respect to Roger, just a final point on Roger. Let's see. What is my final point on Roger? Well, I'm going to have to kind of work into it again. But he is around. He has confirmed that he will be playing all this year, etc. But and right up until the end, I think he will play. He will make the best effort that he can to overtake Connors in the title record. But again, it's just looking unlikely. The point about Federer is this. he's just getting older, folks. I had a commenter come on the other day that made I think a comment that was probably just the most appropriate one to make, which is just Roger's 37. He's 37 years old. And yesterday he was on the court playing against this guy in his early 20s, Borna Coric. It's already miraculous that Roger's even out there in the semifinal against Borna Coric. But at 37 years old, in the tennis world, he's like a grandfather in the tennis world. But the comment that I got from Inter Terry is the person's name, very intelligent tennis commentator, but he just kind of gave me the brass tacks of what he thinks, and that was that Roger's 37. He's not going to be competitive forever. I mean, he had a comeback. Perhaps the comeback in terms of some of the results were based on the fact that you didn't have a Novak Djokovic playing at full form. But you know what? Federer had some steep competition. He had Nadal. He had Cilic. His comeback was real. There's no question about that. His comeback was very real, very concrete, and very meaningful. But it couldn't last forever. He's 37. There's just the mortality question. There's just the mortality question. In tennis, 37 is, I mean, you're pretty much a dinosaur at 37 in tennis, historically speaking. The very fact that he's been able to persevere and have this comeback at such a very ripe old age, as it were, is phenomenal, miraculous. We should be thankful for it as Fed fans, but we need to understand that it can't last forever. Roger needs to stay in good spirits, stay in a good mood, play tennis, have fun. That's what he appears to be doing. He appears to be accepting the reality that he will lose. He appears to be accepting the reality that he's going to be sinking in the rankings probably, but he appears to want to persevere and want to play nevertheless. And that's why we owe the ultimate thanks and ultimate debt of gratitude to Roger Federer, because he's going to show us not only his rise, not only his peak, but also his fall. In all the gory detail, it's going to be an emotional experience, but maybe it'll be a lesson for all of us in a way, for all of us who do get emotionally involved in tennis matches sometimes, and I think we all do a little bit to some degree. Maybe it's a lesson that, you know what, let's not get emotional. Let's have fun. That's what this game is about. Let's have fun watching Roger, and maybe, you know, I could point that comment back at myself. I mean, maybe I need to temper back my own expectations, to be honest. I've had some strange comments from viewers over the months and years, and one comment that I had from one person, which I haven't really got again, is that, you know, stop supporting Federer so intensely, Aaron, because you're going to jinx it. You're going to jinx Roger Federer by supporting him, by believing in him. Well, I really don't. I think that's a very sort of superstitious argument. I don't think it's a credible argument. I really don't think I'm jinxing anything by having faith in Roger Federer, by posting videos where that state the facts. For example, in the match with Nishikori, I stand on the proposition that was a resurrection. It turned out it was a kind of short resurrection, but it was a resurrection. So my support of Roger Federer, if anything, helps Federer to a greater degree than he would otherwise maybe be helped. But I don't even believe that it does that unless he's watching, unless he's directly impacted by it. I don't think that really makes a difference in terms of whether Roger ultimately wins. So, you know, we support Roger. I mean, at least for the Fed fans, we do support Roger. We don't believe that our support is somehow hurting him. But with respect to Federer, he's 37 years old, to reiterate. Of course, you know that. It can't go on forever, but we owe an enormous debt of gratitude because apparently Roger, unlike Bjorn Borg, who scampered off at such an early age, unlike Bjorn Borg, Roger Federer is going to stick around. and he's going to play out his career, and no intention of retiring yet. Even if he's not winning, he's going to show us his full fall, the full arc and trajectory of Roger Federer's career, the true mortal arc of Roger Federer's career will be on display for history and for posterity. And that's because of a decision that Roger is making to play out his career. It's a courageous decision. It's an admirable decision. It's a wonderful decision that, again, we owe him an enormous debt of gratitude for those of us who love watching Roger Federer play. Well, the man of the hour, the man of the day, the man of the last few months is, of Coric. Roger Federer was not able to kind of hit the mark this week in Shanghai, outgunned by Borna Coric. And Borna Coric, let me tell you, brought the same kind of weaponry and the same, pretty much the same level of play that he brought to Roger Federer yesterday to Novak Djokovic today. But in contrast, Novak Djokovic would not be bossed around. Federer was getting bossed around by Coric in a big way. And in fact, if you had to kind of boil the whole match down, it would just be that Federer was getting bossed around. He didn't have answers. He didn't have convincing answers with interest in terms of how to respond to Coric. And Coric was getting under Federer's skin in all the right ways, and in all the ways that Coric knows how to do. Remember, Coric has beaten Federer before. Coric knows how to get under Federer's skin. Well, Federer didn't have answers, but Djokovic did, and Coric had to deal essentially with what Federer had to deal with yesterday, which is a person, in this case Djokovic, simply returning everything, and returning it with, and often at times with a very significant amount of interest. Djokovic, again, would not be controlled. He will not be bossed around on a tennis court, not when he's playing this well. I would urge you to take a look at the highlights from this match on YouTube in a way, but in another way, this was not a match, as I've said before, that's going to produce a lot of great highlights. There was a war of attrition element to this, and there was an air of inevitability to this match, particularly after the first game of the second set when Novak went up a set and a break. But in terms of the big scheme of things, folks, I do believe that Novak is on course to do great things in the tennis world. I do believe that. I think every smart commentator believes that Novak Djokovic is on course to do potentially record-breaking, amazing things in the tennis world. I'm learning to enjoy watching Novak play, watching him work his magic. He is a tremendous tennis player, a tremendous athlete with a very impressive variety of shots in his toolbox and a lot of consistency, a lot of willpower. He is, as some of the most knowledgeable people in tennis have stated, the together tennis player that history has ever witnessed. Well, that included today some very effective and beautiful even net play from Djokovic. He's definitely more of an all-court player than Coric. Coric brings a style that's somewhat similar to Djokovic, but I do believe that Djokovic has the court in terms of a full court much better, much more comprehensively, and is able to do so in a more and precise way than Coric. He, again, will not be bossed around. Djokovic will not be bossed around, folks. He is recalcitrant in the face of the asserted authority of an opponent, and Coric was essentially doing the same thing today as he was doing to Federer yesterday, but Djokovic had answers. Djokovic would not be bossed around, and I'll just kind of leave it at that. I've said that a few times, and that kind of essentializes it. We've talked about the numbers. Djokovic's first serve percentage was astonishing. He had a 91% win behind his first serve today. For the course of the match, he was 70% behind his second serve. Coric was serving up a storm as well, but it was just not enough to match the great Novak Djokovic, who created 9 break points on the Coric serve, converted 2 of them. Coric was able to get only 1 break point on the Djokovic serve, and he could not convert it. So there were not a lot of winners really in the match. Coric, in fact, hit many more winners, or not many more, a few more winners than Djokovic, but there were some good points. I'll say it again. There was some highlight material, but on the whole, this had a kind of air of inevitability. Djokovic was outdoing Coric kind of just by an edge. But we're getting some comments on Federer. He might need a psychologist. I don't know. But you know what? I can tell you this. He seems to have his head screwed on very well lately. And I like that. You know, I mean, he was a little upset after the match yesterday, to be sure. And he wasn't exactly lively and happy during the post-match press conference. But he has his head screwed on correctly these days. He's staying even-keeled emotionally. So we'll see in terms of the psychology. I mean, maybe there is some focus that Federer is lacking that he's not telling us about, but he's not mentioning any of that in these post-match interviews. What he's telling us in the post-match interviews, folks, is that I'm getting old. I'm playing well. That's what he's been saying after all these defeats. You know, I'm doing fine out there, guys. You know, it's kind of like Tennis Talk Daily. You guys can like riff on about this, but I'm playing just fine. I think I'm doing just fine for my expectations. And his expectation part on the fact that he's 37 years old. And he's the only one, in fact, living in his own body, and he's the only one who can actually fully feel and understand his mortality. He did win a Grand Slam this year, Ollie, at age, well, no, I think was it age 37 or was it 36? But I guess it was 37, that's right, because it's 01. No, he turned 37 this year. So, in any case, he did win a Grand Slam this year. He did, no, it would have been, I'm sorry. He was born in 1980. I always go back to his birth date. I think, maybe it was 80 or 81. I'm not going to do this on Fed's birthday. But in any case, he did win a Grand Slam this year. He did have a good start to the year. But we know, those of us who, that's what I thought, Ollie. 36 for the Australian. And I know, I understand. I know you don't make many errors like that. I know you're very precise, so thank you. But in any case, he had a great start to the year. There's no question about that, folks. But the reality is that he slipped off fairly quickly. Rotterdam was a lot of fun. We had a lot of fun at Tennis Talk Daily at Rotterdam. But when he got into the Sunshine Double again, to defend the Sunshine Double anyway, he started to run into some problems. And as I noted yesterday, in a way, yesterday's match could be a kind of bookend of sorts. We'll have to see, because Federer's problems, in a way, started with Coric at Indian Wells. Now, he won that match against Coric. I believe it was a semifinal. But Coric took a set and was giving Federer a hard time, getting under Federer's skin in the way that he knows how, by hitting to Federer's feet and dominating Federer, bossing Federer around. So now, of course, at the end of the year, we're seeing the same. We're seeing Coric, who's actually playing better probably than he was at Indian Wells, kind of giving Roger the same sort of runaround. So whether Roger needs a psychologist, I don't know. But whether he's going to be winning more Grand Slams, folks, it's a question, and it's quite possible that there will be one more he could squeeze out. And I believe it's, I would like to see him squeeze out more major wins. And in in the course of doing so, beating Nadal and beating Djokovic again. But listen, I've been accused of articulating too high of an expectation with respect to Federer, and some people say that I jinx Federer by doing that, which is it's actually giving me a lot of credit that I don't deserve, because it's saying somehow that Roger Federer is like listening to me, and I don't think Roger's listening to me, so I don't think it really matters what my expectations are. But I'll never apologize for believing in Roger Federer. But what I will say is that he's getting old, and I will say that maybe I should start to temper back my expectations, particularly after the full scope of the experience this year. Listen, we'll see what happens. He's going to be playing in Basel, I think, or Basel, excuse me, but we'll see what happens with respect to Paris and whether he's playing Paris. We'll see how things go, but in terms of the evidence we have, well, I see what you mean in terms of Federer rushing the net too much in the match against Millman. He's been doing a little bit of that, but again, he's trying to end the points early. He was doing it very effectively in terms of a kind of tempered forward momentum against Nishikori. I think Federer has more titles in him, but I think at this point, I, as the commentator, chief commentator here at Tennis Dog Daily, I'm going to have to devote some real thought into how much faith I can put in Federer going forward. I do have faith that he can win more titles. I do have faith that he can display some beautiful tennis for us all to behold. But whether we should be really rooting him on to win, many more Grand Slams, I mean, I think it's probably unrealistic at this point, to be quite honest. And it has nothing to do with how great he is. It has nothing to do with his record. It has something to do with just mortality. 37 years old. I've had one commentator say that it's over for Federer, one commenter, one subscriber to the channel, and it's a guy that knows quite a bit about tennis, and he's just saying, listen, it's over, and it's not a big deal that it's over. It's just over. All good things must come to an end, and all good things mortal must come to an end. But people age, people get older. He's having to face these really young people, and they just have more commitment, energy, and just chutzpah, I think is the correct words for it. But yeah, I mean, these people are just not giving up. Coric will not give up. Djokovic got a taste of that medicine today. Coric will not give up. I mean, I think Coric has given us a lot of evidence that he's going to be around for a while. He's not going anywhere, and I do think Coric, along with Medvedev, possibly Tsitsipas, we're still waiting on team. There is Alexander Zverev, but in a way, we'll have to see what happens with Alex Zverev. It's very possible that he's the one who will, apparently have all that promise in the beginning, but he'll never be able to follow through on it. It's possible with Zverev, but I think Coric, in a way, has a greater chance. I think Medvedev, in a way, has an even greater chance than Zverev. Tsitsipas, we like for certain reasons, but he's struggling. He doesn't have the titles to kind of back up the results. He's been having very impressive runs. He's been getting to the finals of some really big tournaments where he's ultimately falling to the big guns. But he needs to start racking up some titles before we can start really putting faith in him. But listen, the man of the hour is Novak Djokovic. Congratulations to the Serbinator, the surgeon, the proctologist, the elastic hyena, a true great of the game, and displayed some tremendous tennis today, some tremendous attack, tremendous defense. And again, he was doing to Coric today what Coric was doing to Federer yesterday. So, the tables turned. I guess that is the ultimate nugget today with respect to Coric, if we're kind of understanding it from Coric's perspective. The tables turned, and Federer let Coric boss him around, but Djokovic was in no mood to take malarkey from the young Croat. And the Spartacus, yes, I like Spartacus. I'm going to consider that very seriously. Thanks, John. But the most important proposition is that Novak Djokovic is the man of the day, the man of the last few months. He is the one to beat. He is the man to beat. There's no question about that. And the only question is who will or who can possibly beat him. Nadal's got a chance. Nadal could do it, but Federer probably has less of a chance. So we're going to continue a lot more of this. I will go live probably this week at some point to talk more. We have a number of 250 level tournaments happening this week, but the next time we're going to get together for some serious commentary, and this is going to be big because I think possibly Federer could play in Paris, but when Paris comes around, we are going to re-huddle, and we're going to be doing some very intense live commentary and following all of the events in that tournament. Of course, the implications and the stakes are very high. Novak Djokovic, for those of you tuning in, is eyeing the world #1, and really, given the practicalities and given the realities of the situation, is within spitting distance, in a sense, of Rafael Nadal. We'll be watching him. We'll be, again, watching Federer to see what happens with Roger and enjoying all the beautiful tennis that he has to produce in the course of what's looking to be his fall from domination. But congratulations to Djokovic. Congratulations to Coric. I am going to have to be wrapping this up for now. It's been wonderful to talk with you guys, and I'm going to sign off from Boston. Farewell.